So I really like the Japanese culture. One of the things that you might notice if you go into a traditional Japanese home is they'll have a niche place carved out in their entryway, and that's where they put a vase. And to represent each season, above it, they'll have a scroll hanging on the wall above where this niche is. And that's where they'll have the traditional Japanese flower arranging. There's different schools. Not only do they recognize by the scroll each season that they're in, but the Japanese culture also recognizes the seasons in between. So right now, basically, we're kind of summer going into fall. So that's a recognized season as well. And so the flower arrangement reflects the flowers that are in season, kind of like the whole idea of eating the food that's in season and from your area. So what I did here is I took an entire bag of clay. Now, clay comes in different types. So there's porcelain clay, cone 10, there's cone 10 stonewares. This particular clay is called Big Red, and there's also one called Big Porcelain and Big Pot and Big White. So these clays have very large size grog in it, and so that they're very good for doing sculpture because the larger grog size particles means that there'll be less shrinkage. So maybe instead of 12% shrinkage, you'll have 10% shrinkage. So it's really good when you're doing sculptural things to use this clay with big grog. So I took an entire bag of Big Red, peeled the bag off, laid it on its side, and basically just sliced it into 4 even slabs, and then threw them down to stretch them. So there's another way you can generate a slab besides using a rolling pin, and that's called pulling a slab. And that's where you pick it up and you slam it down at an angle, pick it up and slam it. You're kind of stepping back and you're pulling it as opposed to picking it up and slamming it down vertically. And then, I use the rolling pin for a little bit. So what I want to do here, there's 4 sides. So this face represents winter because I took pine needles and I pressed them into the clay using a pizza roller. And then you take the pine needles out. And then on another side, I think I used pampas grass for summer, and I think I used honeysuckle, and I forget what I used for the 4th side. But for each season, I took a plant that you would normally see at that season. And so that idea here is you just turn the vase to represent the seasons. So it is a piece of sculpture. You can see that that's the pampas grass, that's coming over the side here. And you see it kind of has a curve here. I just allowed, as I rolled the slabs out, whatever they kind of did, I just allowed them to do that. And then I used them. And then I had a little bit left over, so that became the base. And then you put a coil on the inside. You can kind of see how I kind of pinched it with my fingers like this along the edges so that it wouldn't leak. So it does hold water. And it's a piece of sculpture. So that's the other thing I'm trying to do, which is a functional art. A local district, and they still have a clay club, and they would hire people to come give workshops. And sometimes City College would have visiting artists. And one year we had some visitors from Korea. We had 4 visiting ceramic artists from Korea. So this is a typical Korean form. They had demonstrated it, and I paid attention, and then I made one. And again, this was a bagger, so it was 25 pounds of clay. Now, I had the good fortune to work for just 7 short weeks for a person who was really gifted at throwing. His name is Michael Lee Redluff, and it was a very small factory called LD Porcelain. He worked with interior designers. They would give him a blueprint of something like this. Actually, one of my job was trimming these 20-inch tall porcelain lamp bases. So it becomes like a score that a musician plays. You have the next to you have the blueprint, and then you throw to that blueprint. And we had a 1/8-inch tolerance. So the pieces that we're making in his shop were 20 inches tall. So when he delivered the piece to the person, it could be 20 and 8 inches tall, no taller, or it could be 19 and 7/8 inches tall. And I forget what the width was, but proportional to that. So you can kind of see how you really have to be here's a case where perfectionism is really, really a useful trait to have. And when he made his pots, he talked about choreography. And actually, if you kind of watched him and the people who worked in his factory, it was a very small factory, they really knew what they were doing. This was kind of before we had video cameras. This was, um, I think it was like mid to early 80s before video cameras really kind of became available to use. So I just sat there in front of them and I watched them. So this is another thing that's good for you to do when you watch somebody who knows what they're doing. Just sort of become your own human video camera and just sketch. Do a side view, just get down low so you're looking at a side view and just draw the shapes as you see them. So in order to throw something like this, and again, I want to have the base wider than the top, but when you throw it, you have to start with an even wider base. And they taught me what's called bulldozing, and that's where you peel the floor off at a certain point and you lift it up and the floor becomes the wall. So that's part of what's going on. So you have to start with something much taller, and then you put your hand inside with the rib and you push out. You start at the top and let it go around a few times to stabilize it so it's centered, and then you slowly go down with the rib, down, 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 or a spoon. They also make these tools that looks like half of a wooden spoon. They're for potters. So these people from Korea came, and and then the other thing I just kind of want to mention about Michael Lee, he taught me about throwing with a pocket. He was one of the few production potters that were left in San Diego. In the 70s, production pottery is really big, and you got paid by the piece. So a mug, you might get paid 10 cents. And he could do one every 27 seconds all day long. And he was actually getting rates, say, like a lawyer, a professional person's hourly rate at that time. So you can kind of see it looks like kind of like a little washboard. You can kind of see these little grooves, and you'll notice that you'll see like dark and light. That's because you're actually using the tip of your finger on the outside. You go like this. Is called the potter's cross, where you put your thumb and your index at the first knuckle there, and you turn your hand upside down, and you're pressing your outside hand. Your right hand is on the outside, and on your left hand, you're using your left longest finger, and you come inside and you push out. So you push the clay out past your other hand, you push in, and you get this loop of clay, and then you raise it up, and you go from about 5 o'clock towards you across your body up towards 11 o'clock, and that's how you throw stuff really tall. And then when you use the rib to pull it out, it of course gets shorter. So these are all the kind of things you have to take into account when you're making something like this. So I basically just stood there and watched and made notes, and then after I watched their demo, I came home and I tried to do one myself. And so what I really like about this pot is it has a good, strong, round rim. All the stress goes to the rim. When the piece dries and during the high fire too, the air is being attacking to take the water molecules out from the top, from the inside, the outside. So it's good to have a really beefed up rim. It helps keep things round as well. And this is a good defined neck, and then a shoulder. This is where they always want to collapse. You have to be careful how you leave them, because the weight of this can actually cause the piece to kind of drop some. And then you can still see the throwing rings. And then here's a foot that flares out, and again, it's rounded at the bottom. And the foot's in the right place so the whole pot doesn't collapse, because clay becomes just as soft during the firing as when you formed it. And so this only has 2 glazes. It has what's called a tenmoku. It's an iron saturated glaze, and where it's thin, it's just brown. And then where it gets a little thicker, it turns black. So this is one thin coat put on the whole pot of this glaze. One that we have here at ECC was called Margie's Oil Spot. And then I took another glaze. This was a barium turquoise matte, and I threw it on the pot. So we have these ladles. We found when I first came to ECC that we would buy these soup ladles, but because it would be in the clay, in the glaze, it would rust and they just fall apart. So one of my students, Japanese, she started bringing in these ladles, and I guess it's kind of like in some cultures, like in Indonesia, when you want to take a bath, it's just a big bunch of water. You just take this big plastic ladle and you just throw the water all over yourself. You soap yourself up, and then you rinse yourself with this ladle. And so it's kind of like giving a bath to the pot. So again, you always want to glaze things upside down. So what big pots like this, it's almost too heavy for one person to hold it. So you put 2 sticks on top of the bucket of glaze, like into a letter V, and then you put the pot on top of that V, sitting on the bucket of glaze, and you reach in with your ladle, you give it a bath. So you're putting the glaze from the bottom towards the top, because we want it thicker at the top and thinner at the bottom. And then I turned it right side up, and then I just sort of put it back on those two sticks, went to the other bucket. Takes 10 seconds for the glaze to dry, and then I threw on this other glaze. So where we see this sort of olive green, that's this turquoise glaze, but thinner on top of the brown. And then I let it dry, and then I just put a little bit more on. Now you can also use turkey basters. You can also use ear syringes to apply the glaze. And I like drips. I just think that looks really great. And I like to have it thick and thin. So a lot of times students think, oh, this glaze is really pretty. I'll put some more. It'll be even better and more. No, it's Story of the Three Bears. And we really want to try to get at least the minimum, which is 1/4 of a millimeter, and the maximum, which is, really 3/4 of a millimeter on the rim. But we're trying for just 1/2 a millimeter here because the glaze does tend to travel. So we try to keep it thinner on the bottom half and thicker on the top half. And one of the fun things that the Koreans did, they did a kind of like a big pizza plate on the bottom. They had a huge bat, and they would put a little bit of sand on the edge, and then they would take a big thing of clay and beat it with a stick and make it out into a pizza. And then they would put a little bit of water, and they would take a huge coil, which they just took a whole bag of clay, and as I was telling you how you pull a slab, they pulled that clay out into like a big French fry, like a big long French fry that was like 6 inches by 6 inches square, like 6 feet long. And then they took one end and the other end and twisted it and rolled it into a coil. And then one of them kind of put it around the other one's arm, like up the arm, around his back, up his other arm. And he would walk over to the wheel, and then he would turn to let the clay come back off on the wheel when the wheel is spinning around. And so they built it up, and they made these huge pots. You could like put a couple people in them. And they used charcoal briquettes suspended by a wire to kind of dry them. And it was really fun to watch these guys. They're highly skilled, and they used the paddle and anvil technique. So I learned really a lot from these people. And another thing, when they were just standing around, there's 4 of them. So when one was demonstrating, the other 3 they don't just stand around, so you're busy wedging clay. And so they would take the clay and they would rip it in half, and then they take the 2 hands and kind of throw it at each other so they wouldn't hurt their wrists, and then rip it and stack it like that. So they were just a bunch of really fun people. It was good. So keep your eyes peeled for things happening in your local college or art center for visiting artists. So I had the good fortune to be a student at Mesa College at a time when Dr. John Conrad was there teaching the glaze and chemistry classes. He has a PhD in chemistry. And Lana Wilson. So Dr. Conrad was having us experiment with soda fired. You're not allowed to do salt firing in the city limits, but we were able to do soda firing. And so this pot here, this is before it was available. I just started saving my scraps of porcelain and white stoneware content. I would blend them. So it was half porcelain, half stoneware. You can buy it now. It's called half and half. And so I threw this bottle, and I thought it's going to be for wine, so why not put grapes on the outside? So Lana Wilson came over to me while I was making it, and she said, hey, would you like to try my WLS tool? The wire loop sgraffito tool. It's made by Kemper. She said it would help you kind of refine your edges and kind of show what grapes on top of the other one. And so, sure, I'll try it. I'll try it. So I used her tool, and it's been in my toolkit ever since. Now, another thing I realized is sometimes it's really hard to get like British racing stripes. If you think of cars and how cars were painted, the little MGs usually had this stripe going down the side of the roof and the front of the hood. And so it's like wide with little narrow things. Well, how do you get a good narrow stripe? It's really hard, especially with slip, because it kind of blots out, it gets thick. So what you do see is you just take a brush, and you don't even care if it's like wispy or not. That adds to its character. And then you carve. You take your dull pencil and nail, a big roofing nail, something. Well, not a roofing nail, but a huge nail. And you can just carve through it. So, and then if you really want to get rid of those wisps, you could take the edge of your trim tool or your flexible metal rib and just kind of, as the wheel's going around, just clean those parts up. But another thing Lana always talked about was to have things relate to one another. So even here, the brush kind of left a few little kind of crumbs, little spudgy smudges here. And so it's kind of repeated there. And so this is kind of repeated up here. So there's a harmony of a repetition. Also, the width of the carving line here is kind of repeated by the width of those carving lines. So those are the kind of things that you want to think of. Even the width of the grape stem kind of gets repeated here. So those kind of gets repeated there and there. So those are the kind of things that you want to think of, and you can kind of see how would it have looked if it didn't have that stripe there. See, kind of nice having that top and the bottom there. And again, I didn't have a whole lot going on with the foot here. It didn't flare out a whole lot. So remember we talked about the basic form counts as one. The rim can count as one or part. So that's not a real strong rim. So this kind of reinforces the trying to make that kind of three quarters and a quarter makes it one. And then, the foot isn't real dominant, so I added this, and then that way I could have this decoration going in the pot and it wouldn't be too much to look at. When you use a kiln that's going to be for salt glazing, so salt glaze back in the olden days, like especially you think of Germany, they would actually take something like we have now, a copper pipe, and cut part of it off, and they put the salt in, and they have holes in the kiln, and when the kiln gets to be about cone 9, you put salt in it, and then you insert this rod, and then you just turn it over, and it dumps the salt, and then it makes this fume, and it vaporizes, and it coats the shelves, all the kiln posts, all the interior of the kiln. So that's a salt kiln. And what happens is the sodium bonds to the silica and the clay, and it makes a sodium silicate glaze. So in this case, I'm here in San Diego, in a city. You can't do salt because it makes chlorine gas, and if you have a atmospheric weather inversion, you'll kill everybody around you and all the trees, and if you're dead, you can't make more pots. So you're not allowed to do that here. But what we can do is we can take baking soda. We're allowed to do that. So that's what Dr. Conrad did. He took a copper pipe and he put the baking soda in, and other people had copper glazes in the kiln, but also see copper turns red in reduction. And so I don't know if you can see it, but this has a very slight pink tinge to it. So the copper from the pipe, when you put that in, plus the other pots that had copper in the glazes, fumed onto this pot. Because I didn't glaze the outside. I only glazed the inside so that it would hold water. But I didn't glaze the outside. And so the copper fumed onto the pot, and that's what gives it this really beautiful pink glow. So one of my teachers, I think it might have been Tom Frankovich, said, photograph everything you ever make. Like, take a slide of it. So you have a record of it. Because you sell most of your work, or, it gets destroyed somehow. So this hopefully is looking a little familiar to you, the subject matter. This is graphite 16 by 20 on paper. So I was taking a drawing class, and we wanted to show chiaroscuro effects. We wanted to show cross-hatching. This right here is a bunch of grapes drawn using the technique called contour drawing. Now, if you're not familiar with that, that's where you place your pencil on the paper, you look at your subject matter, and your eye follows the tip of the grape stem down to the next part, and then it goes around, and you press lighter and darker. You never take your pencil off the paper, and you never take your eyes off the subject matter. So you're not looking at the paper or your hand or the pencil. You're only looking at the subject matter. So it's one continuous line. This is my vase that I drew. You can see that's that same vase after it came out of the kiln. So like top view, side view, different angles, and just kind of abstract, kind of put together. These are the kind of things you learn about when you take a class in design and composition. And so we always talk about, the eye generally comes in on the upper left and kind of ends on the lower right. But you want to have movement in it. And so we're trying to show layering, what's on top, what's below. And so drawing can be really fun. Now, why does a person take a drawing class? Well, basically, when you take a drawing class, they'll usually have a cart and they'll put things on it, and then you have to draw those things, and the teacher comes around and talks to you. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to be able to draw what you see and have it confirmed by other people, like, yeah, that's what's in front of you. Yes, you take a picture of it. Here's your picture of your drawing. Yes, it matches. Well, why? Who cares? Because as artists, we tend to be visionaries, and we can see things. Just think of Steve Jobs, right? There wasn't an iPhone, there wasn't a computer, but somehow with him and his buddies, there is one now. So, once I saw Charlie Rose, it was two of those people that worked for Steve Jobs, and they were talking about when they have conversations with each other, what they do is they put like, a napkin or a piece of paper down, and one of them says, "You mean like this?" and draws it, and the other one's like, "No," crosses out like that. So the way they talk to each other is actually is by drawing. So what you want to do is you want to be able to draw so that the things that are in your head that don't even exist yet, you want to be able to get those down. Now, the other fun thing about when you draw or any kind of creative process, when you have an idea, you start to put something down on paper, maybe in words, or you draw it. And then as you go, it's like, wait a minute, but what if I did that? Or what would happen if I did this? Or who if I did that first? Or how about this? And you usually get about 10 more ideas. And then once you're putting those down, you get like 10 more doors to open up. So I like to go back to the root educare. It means to draw out. And what later when you see my photo drawings, that's what I did. I took the gift of my being a myopic person that can only see so far, great close-up vision, to take close-ups of things, and then you have no idea what you're looking at, so that gives you visual ambiguity, and you can draw an image out of something that it isn't even there. So I hope that helps a little bit. Okay, so at one point in my life, I took a look at how many jobs I had, and part time simultaneously at one instant in time. I wrote them down, I made a list, and it turned out I had 14 part time jobs. That's kind of how it is for artists. Um, I happened to be at the Off Track Gallery. I was at another co op gallery called Many Hands, and I was teaching at, I think, 3 or 4 different entities. I was an artist in residence at San Diego City Schools, and anyway, I was photographer. You have to promote your own work, so you have to photograph your work, and then you submit it. You find out all these contests that you enter your work in contests, exhibitions, galleries, all that stuff. Okay, so I was in an artist co-op, and they were going to have a weaving show. Each every 10 weeks or so, we would have a show, and I didn't want to be left out. So I decided that I was going to weave some pottery. Now, when I was a little kid, I grew up in LA, and during the summer, we could go to back to school, and we would have you pay 50 cents, and there'd be these craft classes, and we used to make these pot holders, and they had these frames, and they were like, you could choose like pink and blue, and you kind of wove them on this frame, and then you tucked in each little corner, and then you took it home, and there's, hey mom, look, that's what I made. And it kind of reminds me of those pot holders when I was a little kid. I really liked them. They worked great. Doubles as a dish rag, they're just great things. So I was kind of thinking of them. So what I did was I took some white stoneware, and I went and bought some mason stain, which is a pink powder and a blue powder. And when I started mixing it up, I just took some clay and kind of made a little pocket, and then I sprayed some water in the pocket, and then I put some of the powder in, and then just kind of mushed it around with my hands. And what I found was the clay was so much drier that it sucked the water even out of that little well I made of water and put the powder in, that it was all these little dried balls. And so I had to keep like spraying it using the side of my hand like you're kneading dough, just try to mix this colorant into the clay. So that was really quite a challenge. So now we've figured out it's easier to use a Vitamix blender and let the clay get totally dry, bone dry, add the water, the powder, 15% by dry weight, and then zoom it up in the blender after it rests about 30 minutes, and that's called slaking, and it just turns it kind of like into waffle batter, and then you put it in a pillowcase and let the water come out like you would put your yogurt and cheesecloth, and so it separates the water out from the clay, and then you can use it. Okay, so this was taking a bowl. You know those wooden bowls you get like from Vermont? They're real pretty thick wooden bowls. So you have that as your support. And then I rolled out pink and blue coils, and then I wove them. So this one, they're both kind of square, but they're rounded. So I did blue and then a pink one, and then a blue and a pink and a blue and a pink. And then the other way, same thing, pink, blue, pink, blue, pink, blue. And what happens is when you turn this bowl over, you would kind of expect the stripes to be going vertically as they are now, but when you turn it over, it ends up being horizontal going on the backside. And same with this one. As you can see, there's a blue and a pink and a blue and a pink and a blue and a pink. And, oh, I'm sorry, no. With this one, I see that I did was, it was all Oh no, no, yeah, yeah, yeah. It's pink and blue, and yeah, that's pink and blue, pink and blue. So when you turn it over, then the stripes on this one will be going vertically. And I used a pizza or pony roller, which is a rounded tool with a rounded barrel end. So not like a wallpaper hanger tool, but one that's rounded. And I used that to kind of flatten these out. So these could be used like as a colander for, washing some grapes. It could be used as something we could put fruit in to ripen so that it doesn't get moldy because of the holes. You could use it when you heat up some bread. You can actually heat the bread up in the oven in this thing, and then when it comes out, put a towel in there and then put the bread back in, and it helps keep your bread on the dinner table warmer longer. But they're just pretty to look at. Okay, so you're at these street fairs, these craft fairs, and I'm over teaching at San Diego State, and they have a fair a couple times a year. So a lady comes into my booth and says, "Yeah, you look like you're pretty good. You could probably do what I want." "Yeah, what's that?" "Well, I need a canister set, flour, sugar, coffee, and I want butterfly handles. I want the handles to be butterflies. And here's a swatch of my wallpaper. I just re-wallpapered my kitchen, and I want you to match the wallpaper. It looks like maybe you could figure that out." So I did. So these are those mason stains. So some of them are slips, and some of them are where you take the mason stain and you put it into this glaze. And so I found a glaze recipe for porcelain clear, and it turns out that it would allow the yellow to stay yellow and the pink to stay pink. We have certain glazes just for stoneware because stoneware shrinks 6% in the high fire, and we have other glazes meant just for porcelain because those shrink 7.5% because that's what porcelain shrinks after the bisque during the high fire. And it found out that if you use the stoneware clear on these mason stains, it acts like a bleach. The boron, one of the ingredients, Gersley borate, bleaches out the yellow and the pink. So if you kind of think mathematically about colors, you know, what do you get if you have pink minus the red? You get white. What happens if you have yellow and you subtract the yellow from the yellow slip? Well, you get white slip. How do you get green? Well, green is blue plus yellow, a little bit of blue plus a lot of yellow. What happens when you take out the yellow? Okay, so you're going to get blue. How about purple? Well, purple is red plus blue. So take away the red, you get blue. So we found out that if you use the wrong glaze, it's going to act like a bleaching agent, and it's just like it's happening in the coral reefs. It's all just going to bleach it out. So it turns out that even though maybe you painted, now these are porcelain, and I did use porcelain clear, and everything was fine. But if you happen to say start with a stoneware pot, you might be thinking, oh, but I have to use that Gersley borate glaze because it's going to shrink the right amount. Yeah, okay, but you're going to lose your colors. So even if you did start with a stoneware pot and then you put those pretty pastel mason stain slips on, you just kind of have to remember, oh, I use those porcelain slips. I better use that porcelain clear. If you just kind of think that way, that'll help you to remember to use the correct glaze. Even though it might crackle a little, as long as it's on the outside, who cares? Just use the correct glaze on the inside to line it, and then it won't leak. So it's kind of fun when you start to get to be pretty good. People come up to you and say, "Can you make me this?" At the craft center, I was the go-to person for a while. At the craft center, there's a lot of really interesting scientists and people there, and this one of them was a doctor of the esophagus. And he needed, for his waiting room, he decided that he needed to have a lamp base that was as if it was someone's esophagus. And that's where you put, the rod through to hold up the shade and all. And it's like, could you please make me an esophagus? It's like, sure, what does it look like? So I made him his esophagus. So it's just really fun where people come up to you, it's something you never would have dreamt of. One year, I remember there was I love to watch the parade on New Year's Day. And one year there was this dragon float. And something about the steam was coming out. It was a teapot, and something about it had two spouts. And then I started looking in the books, and there's this really great book, 3,000 years of Oriental ceramics, and another one 5,000 years of Oriental ceramics, and it would show these ewers, EWER, and it would have two spouts, one going one way and one going the other way. And I'm thinking, what, you put the red wine in this one and the white wine in that one? I mean, I don't know. So this person, right about the time that this dragon was going by on the float, a couple months later, he comes up to me and says, "Hey, I want you to make my family a tea set, and the big platter that everything's going to sit on is going to be that represents, I think, my dad, and the teapot's going to represent my mom. And there's three kids, so I want to have three spouts, and I want them all to work too. And then I want three cups for the three kids, but one of the kids is married, so I want you to take the handles and kind of link them so that the handles are linked, right?" And so that presented all these challenges. But anyway, it was really fun because it's something I'd seen on TV, kind of made me think about what to do and made me go to the history books. And then it's real fun when somebody asks you to do something you're kind of curious about to see if you could do it. So this is a mug. Now I had found out that when you take photo shots for clients with a 50 millimeter lens, sometimes the item is too small. So I invested in a 28 to 80 zoom, and then I discovered the existence of the 2x converter. So when you take a photo, so this is a normal size mug, okay, just pound and a quart or something, normal mug you drink out of. But I just got up really close and had it fill the frame, so it just looks big. I like to show it because you can see the throwing rings that we were talking about earlier, and the ceramic underglaze pencils. And the other topic I wanted to introduce was that of translucency. So one of the things we investigate when you take my class is glazes. We talk about opacity. So this is a clear glaze. These are the mason stains that have been put into the porcelain clear glaze and just applied after the bisque with a brush. And so, pretty much you can see through them. They're transparent. They're like, it's a purple transparent, it's a pink transparent. But because they're on a red clay and you're firing it in oxidation, it doesn't come out looking like a crust of red brown. It comes out looking kind of blonde, kind of yellowy, tan color. So those are the kind of things you have to think about when you think of clear. A lot of times people think clear, oh, it's going to be white. Well, no, if you put on dark brown clay, it's going to be dark brown or dark green, depending on reduction oxidation. So what I like about this, it has a good foot that flares out. We got the throwing rings. And then this also shows that I had taken my finger and I went like this while it was my hand was inside the pot, and I did that while I had just thrown it. And so I actually have 4 kind of sides. So it's been kind of squared off, and then I put the handle on one of the flat sides. Now, Michael Lee Redleff had taught me, one of my jobs was to put handles on all those casseroles and various things. And so he taught me that for most people, making a handle can be rather challenging. And he suggested sit down one day and just make 12 handles. Even though you're not going to use them, you could save them in a plastic bag and you could eventually use them. But he said, for most people, until you sit down and make 12, you'll always have lousy handles. So you sort of start with a hunk of clay. You kind of roll it into like a carrot, something kind of like a railroad spike. And then you take your hand. Let me see how I can do it this way. Yeah, like this sort of. And you use the palm of your hand and your fingertips to flatten it. And then you go like this with your hand. So you kind of make the handle shape like that. And you pull down, kind of like you're milking a cow, sort of, not really. If you have long hair, it's like taking the water out of your hair when you wash it. So you get it wet. Now, usually what we want to have is we feel how thick is the wall of the pot. And then this part here, this part of the handle, we'd like it to equal how thick the wall is. And this part could be like 1.5 times, no more. And then Michael Lee Redleff had taught me that you want to do what's called touch attach. You just want to put the handle on and not kind of smear it. Because usually this is going to be leather hard, and this is going to be not even cheese hard. You've added clay to it, so it's kind of more like peanut butter consistency, and it's going to shrink too much. So if you smear this really wet clay over a pot that's already shrunk, you're asking for the whole thing to lift off and crack. And then you of course score it and put slip. Now another thing that I went to a workshop and learned. There was a man named Robin Hopper. He's an Englishman, and he decided to live in Canada. And he has several videos and books out, The Ceramic Spectrum and Form and Purpose. Um, so what he talked about, and he actually in his book, he takes a look at your hand, and when you make a fist, you'll notice from the middle finger down that it gets smaller. So it's always good to start with a carrot so that the handle will be tapered, so that when you go to grasp it, it fits in your hand. Round handles, especially if your hand is wet or greasy, if you're doing something in the kitchen, your hand's greasy, it's hard to grasp a round handle. The whole thing kind of turns in your hand. Also, as you get older, you might be getting carpal tunnel or arthritis. It's just harder to hold on to something. Another thing that Robin Hopper taught me was to kind of get away from the idea that having a high handle is beautiful. And so shows kind of transition. I actually put them more from the bottom to about midway up, because ergonomically it takes less energy to grasp a handle and pour the liquid out the lower you have the handle because of the center of gravity. So most people kind of think it looks real pretty to put handles up here real high. They think that's beautiful. Well, it's just harder to drink out of. Some people even put the handle on the inside and have it come over the top. Well, then you can't turn the whole pot upside down and let it sit on the rim. Um, Also, I like having rather thick lips at the top, simply because it'll last longer. It helps keep your pot round, and if you happen to bang it against the sink or bump it, it tends not to chip. Real thin lips are much easier to drink out of, um, but they tend to chip, and then the whole pot can crack. So this also helps to keep it round. And then I like to turn the whole pot upside down after I've attached the handle, because they're usually kind of wet when I put them on. And that helps them to get a nice curve, so it droops the correct way. If you let it dry sitting up when you put the new handle on, you'll see sometimes a person might put a sponge inside, but sometimes that's too much resistance and it actually pulls it off or makes it crack. So if you just turn the pot upside down while it's drying and then wrap it in a plastic bag for 2 days, so it can equilibrate, then you have a pretty good chance of getting a nice curve there and also have a good attachment. So when we attach, I like to use a fork or a dull pencil, or I'll take a chopstick and put it in the pencil sharpener and then drag it on the sidewalk or on a piece of sandpaper or a back of a pot, so it's not too pointy, so it's like a permanently dull pencil, and make deep X's like diamonds where it goes on the pot and on the handle, and same thing over here. So you put the handle on and draw around the handle to see where you have to score. Take it back off, score the handle, score the pot, put just a drop of water on the handle, both top and bottom, and then on the top and on the bottom of the pot you put a drop of water, and then you take some of the same clay and mix water with it until it's the consistency of peanut butter. And those of you who've handled carbondo, it's like mixing the epoxy and the resin together so that it's nice and even. Or those of you who like cream, butter, and sugar, make cakes and cookies, something like that. But like good quality, the healthy peanut butter. You just got to mix it so it's all even. You just put a little worm of that there and a worm of it here, and then you put your hand inside to push against the pot, and then your other hand is grasping it here. Now, sometimes the handle is too wet and kind of slimy, and you can't get a good grasp on it. So that's when, like, in the olden days, men used to carry handkerchiefs in their pockets, and so it's a real fine, like almost like silk or cotton that you wrap around your piece, and then you can get a good grasp on it, because you need to push them into each other. I'm gonna put the mic down a second to show you the hands. So you have your hand like this, and that's where you scored the pot, and then you have the other hand. Oh, I can't do it. Okay, well, whatever. And you basically have to put them together. Can I do that? Okay, well, anyway, you have to get these two, and you have to get them together so that they interlock. And that requires you pushing from the inside as you're grasping it here and pressing it towards each other, and that's how you get a really good attachment that won't fall off. So as an artist, my point of view is really coming from a conceptual place, and I'm interested in how things relate to one another. And one of the things that I really like is language. So conceptually here, I'm interested it was a drawing class, and we had to use barrel color Prismacolor pencils on paper. And I conceptually I was interested. So you have this glass, and you got this striped straw inside, and it could bend, and what happens how it gets refracted here, and it gets all broken up. So that's the conceptual visual part. So for a while, I worked in one of the first vegetarian restaurants here in San Diego, and I was then asked to work in their catering division. So as a cook, so I've always been interested in food and recipes, and but when you're in the back, you're hearing this language about if something's been 86'd, and it's like this secret language. Everybody has their lingo, right? So and the waitresses and the waiters are always filling in these tickets, right, and this with the side of that. So I not that I always stoop to being literal, but in this case, this became part of a series, an artist working series, and so the idea was I would make these tickets as a work of art, a colored pencil drawing, and saying what it is. So one OJ with a side of fried egg, and part of the problem that we're supposed to solve as a student in the class, it was Mr. Hiroshi Miyazaki was my instructor at the time, and he was really getting fascinated by the new Macintosh and the new, boy, when the color printer came out. Wow. So at that time, the pixels were huge, and the things that came out, he kind of took delight in the fact that the things weren't very good. And then you could really see all the pixels. So he said, "Hey, in your drawing, just choose one of your elements that it's going to look like it got printed by the Macintosh printer with the really big pixels." And so he try to mimic that. So this is the fried egg on the side of this glass of orange juice. And I had done this right before the O.J. Simpson fiasco, the Bronco on the freeway and all that. So this is one O.J. and a side of fried egg. So it's a fried egg on the side. So I went ahead and made some of these sculptures that of the tickets, and so one of them was a actual glass of orange juice, and I hung a fried egg, a sculpture of a fried egg on the side of the sculpture of the glass of orange juice, and I put some French fries on the side, and so I was going to have a whole show where I would have these tickets, and then have the actual food that this ticket represented, in like on a salad bowl, you could put whatever food you wanted on the side of the bowl, right? So just to have fun with it. And what's really fun is as an artist, you have an opportunity to enter these competitions and these exhibitions. And so there was one that was called Humor in Art. And so I submitted my piece, and the fun thing is to see, how people react to them, and who buys them, right? So it was the person who owns the Broken Yolk Cafe. He's the one that bought my glass of orange juice with the egg hanging on the side. Also, Julia Child had a whole cookbook. My brother bought the cookbook for my mom, and and I was going to be in another show with the Ceramic Artists of San Diego. We were going to be in Spanish Village, and it was supposed to be a French provincial, a country French show. So Dr. Conrad had showed us how you can make plates really fast. You roll them out like pizzas. You take the clay and you make it into like camembert cheese, and then you slam it down a few times and you roll it out. So it's pretty much round anyway. Because you don't want to start with a square thing and cut off the edges. You waste too much. So you bang it around to a round thing and then roll it out. Then you take it to the wheel, you cut it, you take the scraps away, and then you take a tool and you go underneath it and lift it up and then mash the rim down. So I decided with Julie Child, she had all these different ways to do eggs. There's like oufs poches, oufs miroir, all these different ways to do eggs. And so I started illustrating, and hers didn't have a whole lot of illustration, so I had to use my imagination or, cook it and then like try to draw what I just cooked. And so using slips on plates. And so on the back side, I would put the recipe, and on the front side would be the illustration. And so then I had to go learn how to go to Rid Out Plastics and find out how you actually make your own like plastic, plexiglass boxes, like super expensive. And so I made it so that it would stand up so you could see both sides of the plate. Those are the kind of things that happen when you're an artist and you're just really dedicated to showing what you're trying to do, and then people can appreciate it as art. So I was attempting to do functional art. this section now is going to be raku. So I just used to love raku. I've kind of become sensitive to the smoke, so I can't really do it anymore, but I loved it. So this is like constructive pyromania. You barbecue pots. So this is a special subset of raku. This is where you take. This is for the impatient potter because usually you got to make something, you got to let it dry a week, then you bisque it, then you put the glaze on. Especially raku, you got to wait 2 or 3 days for it to dry out so it doesn't blow up in the kiln, and then you put it in the kiln. You take it to 1650 Fahrenheit and melt the glazes, and then put on all this protective gear, and then take it out while it's red hot, and put it in a bucket that's made out of metal with pine needles, and it catches on fire, and then put more pine needles in there and put the lid on, and then like maybe cover with a wet towel so you don't smell so much of the smoke, and either take it out and re-oxidize it or just leave it there till the next day, or take it out and quench it in oil, or take it out and quench it in water. And it's just kind of a little adventure there. And but this is for the impatient potter, okay? That's just too much time. So what we found out as potters is that you can take sawdust and you soak it in water, and then you wedge that into your clay. So now your clay is the consistency, say, of cottage cheese, small curd cottage cheese. And now you're going to throw it or roll it out and make something. And then while it's wet, you're going to put it right in the kiln that's already hot. And it's going to form like this steam cloud along it. So just the way a tree works, where the water comes into the root and then it comes up the xylem, then it goes to the leaves, and then it evaporates. Well, when that one little droplet of water evaporates from the leaf, because they're all connected to each other like a big chain, it sucks more water out of the ground. So as long as there's water in the ground. So that's how it dries the pot out without it exploding. So in this case, as you know, I like to experiment with pots. I don't like to do little test tiles. So I decided to make, my mom was a really good pie maker, and so I made a pie crust out of clay, and I filled it with banana peels and orange rinds because I was hoping that those oils and the potassium in the rind of the banana might make its own glaze, like self-glazing pottery. So that was my experiment, and I made it and then I put a lattice on top, and then I fired it. And so I took it out, and this is what it looks like when you've just taken it out of the kiln. It was still kind of hot inside. I took the picture at night, and it's already starting to cool quite a bit. And no, the experiment failed. There was no glazing that happened, but it was still, interesting little piece. So now raku kind of dates back. There was a typhoon in Japan, so the story goes, and basically a lot of destroyed roof tiles, kind of like what we're experiencing right now with all the hurricanes. And the Japanese really revered the Korean potters. They had a lot of skills. All cultures know something. It has to do with the clay that they have, and your clay might be different, and they might have different techniques than you. It's true for all cultures. So the story goes that there was a war, and there was a typhoon, and there was some Korean potters that were imported to Japan, and they just needed to make a whole bunch of roof tiles because of all this terrible damage that occurred. And so raku is basically this process where you have this kind of groggy clay that means a lot of sand in it, and you make something out of it, and you put a glaze on it, you fire it, like I said, and you can take it out while it's hot. Well, supposedly this is how raku kind of started, is that the Korean potters were given this really inferior clay that had a lot of sand in it, and they were kind of, they needed to make all these roof tiles, so that they just kind of like took them out. I guess they had some kind of tongs and took them out of the fire, and found that, wow, they didn't break. And at some point, someone figured out about putting glaze in. Well, it wasn't until Paul Soldner went to Japan, and then when he came back after he saw the process, he said, this could get even more fun and exciting for the pyromaniacs among us. And what we'll do is, instead of just taking it out of the kiln and letting them just sit there, we'll put it into something that'll burn. So Fahrenheit 451, paper burns. So you put it into this metal container so it doesn't catch on fire. And you put something that will burn in it. Pine needles are great. Newspaper's okay. Eucalyptus leaves good. They have lots of oils. And you catch it on fire. But you put the lid on. But it has to burn because it's so hot. But it can't because there's no oxygen. So what happens is there's a reduction, a post-firing reduction that happens, and that's why the pots turn black, and that's what happens with the copper turning to this shiny new penny look. So, in a nutshell, that's kind of what the raku process is. So we'll go to the next slide and we'll see some more examples.